There's a smell in this house at night that I have never been able to name. Something between old wood and cold air, and something else underneath that. Something that has been here longer than me and will be here after. I have sat in this chair for 30 years, and I still cannot name it. Some things you live with your whole life and never get close enough to understand. That is the truth of it. That is the whole truth right there, if you want me to stop talking already. But I won't stop. Not tonight. Tonight I want to say it. All of it. The part I have kept folded up inside me like a letter I never mailed, tucked into a coat pocket, forgotten for years, then found again when the weather turns cold and you reach for the old coat, and there it is. Still there. Still sealed. I was 51 years old the morning I found out. 51 years old. A Tuesday, January. The sky outside still dark when I came downstairs to make coffee, because I had slept badly. The way I always slept badly. When something in the house was wrong, even if I couldn't say what. My body knew things before my mind would accept them. My body had been knowing for months. The phone was on the kitchen counter. Diane's phone. She had left it there the night before, which was not like her. She was careful with that phone. Careful the way people are careful with things that can hurt them if dropped. I did not pick it up right away. I stood at the counter and I watched the coffee drip, and I looked at that phone and I felt something move through me that I cannot describe even now. A kind of gravity, a pulling downward, like the floor was softer than it should be. I picked it up. I don't know what I expected. I think I expected nothing. I think some part of me was still the man who trusted people, the man I had been for 51 years, a man who believed that the people he loved were who they said they were. The screen lit up, and in that light, in that cold January kitchen light, before the sun had even considered rising, I read a message from a name I had known for 32 years. A name that had been in my life longer than my children. A name I had spoken more times than I could count, at cookouts and card tables and hospital waiting rooms and on the side of a basketball court when we were young, and everything still felt like it was ahead of us. Raymond Lewis, my best friend since we were 19 years old. The message was short, 4 lines. I will not repeat them here because some things do not need to be repeated. They were the kind of words that are only ever written between 2 people who have already been places together, who have already been inside something together for long enough that the words are easy, comfortable, the language of people who are not afraid of each other anymore. I stood there, the coffee finished dripping, the refrigerator hummed. Outside, somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went quiet. I stood there for I don't know how long. Long enough for the coffee to go from hot to warm. Long enough for my hands to stop shaking and start being very still. There is a stillness that comes after the shaking. I know that now. A stillness that is not peace. A stillness that is something harder. Something that has no good name. I put the phone back exactly where it was, exactly the same angle. I went upstairs, I got dressed, I came back down, poured the coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I drank it slowly, and I did not think. That was the strangest thing. I did not think. I just sat there in the grey of that January morning, and I breathed, and I drank my coffee, and I was the calmest I had been in months, maybe years, Diane came downstairs at 6:30, like always, dressed for work, hair done. She smiled at me the way she'd been smiling at me for going on 27 years, and said, "Good morning, baby." And I said, "Good morning." And she picked up her phone from the counter and slipped it into her purse and poured herself a cup of coffee and asked me if I wanted eggs. And I said no thank you, and she kissed me on the cheek and she went to work. And I sat there for a long time after the door closed behind her. See, I tell people I am a patient man. I have always told people that. And it is true in some ways. I can sit with discomfort. I can carry things. I learned that early. My father was a man who carried things and never complained, and I watched him do it my whole childhood, and I thought that was what strength looked like. A man who holds things, a man who does not spill. What I did not understand then, and what I am not sure I understand even now, is the difference between patience and avoidance, between holding and hiding, between a man who waits because he knows what he is waiting for, and a man who waits because he does not know what else to do. I did not call Raymond that day. I did not call Raymond for 3 weeks. I saw him twice in those 3 weeks. Once at his house, on a Saturday, the way we always spent Saturdays when the weather was too cold for much else, sitting in his den, watching whatever game was on, talking about nothing, the way men talk about nothing for hours, when they are comfortable with each other. And once at my daughter's birthday dinner, where Raymond sat across the table from me and ate my daughter's birthday cake and laughed at my son-in-law's bad jokes and looked me in the eye without blinking. And I looked back, and neither of us said a word about it. I have spent years trying to understand how I did that, how I sat across from that man and passed him the bread and asked him how his truck was running and watched him cut a piece of birthday cake for my granddaughter and didn't reach across that table but I didn't. That is the thing. I didn't. And it was not because I was afraid. I need you to understand that. I was not afraid of Raymond. I had known Raymond since we were 19, since we were playing pickup basketball on cracked asphalt on a summer evening in 1971, since we had driven across 3 states together in a car with no air conditioning, since we had stood together at each other's mother's funerals. I was not afraid of him. What I was something I took longer to find the word for. I was deliberate, for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time in my life. I was completely, coldly, entirely deliberate. I went through that phone again the following Friday night when Diane was at her sister's. I went through it carefully, not with anger, not with the shaking hands of before, with the steady hands of someone who is building something and needs to measure twice. There were messages going back 8 months, more than I want to say, long ones and short ones, tender ones and ones that were not tender at all, but something hungrier. Phone calls, dozens of phone calls, some of them in the middle of the day when I was at work, some of them late at night when I was asleep 2 feet away from her. 2 feet from where I was sleeping. I wrote down what I needed, dates, times, specific things, not for any legal reason. I was not planning anything legal. I want to be clear about that. What I was planning was not about a courtroom or a lawyer or splitting up assets. What I was planning was something older than any of that. Something that came from a place I didn't know I had in me. I want to say right here that I am not proud of all of it. I want to say that and mean it, and I think I do mean it. But I also know that some of me, some quiet part of me that still lives in that January kitchen with the cold coffee, does not fully regret it. And that is the honest thing. A man can regret the version of himself that did something and still understand why that version did it. Both can be true. I have found that both can be true about most of the important things. Raymond owned a small business. Heating and cooling, he had built it from nothing. From 2 vans and a storage unit to a real company with 12 employees and a good name in the county. He was proud of that. Rightfully so. He had built it the way you build things, slowly, with bad years mixed in with the good ones, and he had held on to it for 20-some years. He had a contract with the county school district, a big one, renewed every 3 years, up for renewal that spring. I knew the man on the county board who handled those contracts. I had known Harold Sykes for 15 years. We had gone to the same church for a decade before Harold's wife made him switch to her church across town. We had coffee sometimes. We talked. We were not close the way Raymond and I were close, but we were the kind of men who knew each other well enough that a phone call would not be strange. I called Harold on a Wednesday morning in February. I did not tell him why I was calling, not the real reason. I told him I had heard some things about the quality of the work coming out of Raymond's company. Equipment issues, some corners getting cut, the kind of thing that might be worth a second look before the contract renewed. I said it carefully. I said it the way you say something when you are saying it for the first time out loud and you want to hear how it sounds. It sounded quiet. That surprised me. I expected it to sound ugly. I expected to hear myself and feel sick. But it sounded quiet and even and almost reasonable, and that was more frightening than anything else. Harold said he would look into it. That was all Harold said. I went home that night, and I cooked dinner. I made the chicken Diane liked, the way her mother used to make it, with the seasoning she kept in the cabinet above the stove. I set the table. I poured her a glass of wine. We ate together and talked about our daughter's new apartment and whether our grandson was too young for the school they were thinking of sending him to. And Diane laughed at something I said, and I laughed back. And the whole thing felt so normal that for a few minutes I almost lost my nerve. Almost. The thing about what I was doing is that it required me to become someone I had never been. It required a kind of coldness I had never used before. I was not a cold man. Ask anyone who knew me. Ask any of my children. Ask the men I worked with for 30 years. They would tell you I was the steady one, the one you came to when something was wrong, the one who would sit with you and not try to fix it too fast. That was me. That was who I was. But this was different. This was something I was doing in a room by myself, something no one could see. And in that room, alone, I found that I was capable of things I had not known about. Patient, slow, specific things. Things that would not happen all at once, but would unfold over months, quietly, the way damage works when it starts from the inside. I also talked to Diane's sister. Now, that one I am less settled about. Cheryl loved Diane. There was no question about that. But Cheryl was also a woman who had a complicated relationship with her own memory of what was right and what wasn't. And she had known Raymond for years, too, and she had always found him charming in a way that Diane sometimes teased her about. I don't know why I thought Cheryl would be an ally. Maybe I wasn't looking for an ally. Maybe I was looking for a witness, someone who would know what I knew, someone who would carry some of it with me. I told Cheryl what I had found. Not everything. Some things. Enough. She went quiet in a way I had not heard from Cheryl before. Cheryl was not a quiet woman. She was the woman who filled every room she walked into, with sound, with her laugh, with her opinions. But on the phone that afternoon, she went quiet and stayed quiet for a long time, and then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "About a month." She said, "And you haven't said anything to her?" I said, "Not yet." She asked me what I was waiting for, and I didn't have a good answer for that. Not one I was ready to say out loud. Because the truth was that I was not waiting to confront them. I was waiting for something else. I was waiting for the things I had set in motion to move far enough down the road that they couldn't be stopped. I wanted Raymond to lose that contract. I wanted it done and gone before anything else happened. And then I wanted Diane to know that I had known, for months, that I had sat across from both of them and known and said nothing and done what I had done anyway, quietly, without a word. I wanted them to understand that I had been there, that I had been present for all of it, that I had not been the fool they thought they were making of me. I don't know. I don't know if that is revenge or something else. I have thought about the word revenge my whole life since then, and I have never been comfortable with it. Revenge sounds like something you do in heat, something explosive, something that happens and is over. What I did was not like that. What I did was slow, and it was careful, and it was surgical, and the man who did it was standing inside my skin, but wearing a face I didn't fully recognize. The contract came up for review in March. Harold Sykes was a thorough man. He did what thorough men do. He looked at things closely. He found a few things. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing criminal. But enough irregularities in the paperwork. Enough questions about whether the work had been properly documented. Enough to recommend that the contract go back out to bid, which meant Raymond had to compete for it again, which meant competing against companies that had been watching that contract for years, waiting for exactly this kind of opening. Raymond lost the contract in April. I heard about it through the usual channels, someone mentioning it at a cookout, someone saying it was too bad, someone saying Raymond was taking it hard. I said it was a shame, and I moved on to the next subject, and I ate my food. And I laughed at the next joke someone made, and I was fine. I was fine in a way that should have scared me more than it did. The thing about Diane. This is the part that takes longer to say. The Raymond part I have told before. Not to many people, not often. But the Diane part I have barely said out loud in 50 years. Because the Diane part is where the person I became is hardest to look at. Not because of what I did, because of what I didn't do, because of what I let go on and on and on, long past the point when I should have ended it. Long past the point when any man with real courage would have looked his wife in the eye and said what needed to be said. I let it go on for 7 more months. 7 more months of dinners and Sunday mornings, and her falling asleep with the television on, and me lying in the dark next to her, with everything I knew sitting on my chest like a stone. 7 more months of being a husband, of doing the things husbands do, of being present and ordinary and giving her nothing to suspect. She was unhappy. I could see it. I had been seeing it for years without understanding what I was seeing. There is a way a person looks when they are living two lives, and one of them is the smaller one. A kind of distance in the eyes, not all the time, not always, but when they think no one is looking. When they are standing at the sink washing dishes and they think they are alone. I had seen that look on Diane for a long time, and I had told myself it was tiredness. It was the years adding up. It was the ordinary weight of a life that had not always been easy. I had been wrong. Or maybe I had not been wrong. Maybe it was all of those things at once. Maybe the dishonesty and the tiredness were not separate. Maybe by the time Raymond had come into the picture, in whatever way he had come, something had already been wrong for a long time. Something neither one of us had known how to name or fix or even acknowledge. I am an old man now. I have had a long time to sit with this, and I will tell you honestly that I do not know which version is true. I do not know if she loved him or if she was just lonely in a way that found the easiest path. I do not know if I had failed her in some way that I was too proud or too blind to see. I do not know if what we had was as solid as I believed, or if I had been building a story about my own marriage that was more comfortable than the truth. These are the things I do not know. What I know is November of that year, a Thursday evening. The children were grown and gone. The house was ours and quiet the way houses become when the children leave. I had come home from work, changed my clothes, started dinner. Diane came home at 6. We ate. We watched a little television. She went upstairs to take a bath. And I sat there in that quiet house, and I thought about all of it, the whole year of it, Raymond and the contract and Cheryl and the phone and the 7 months of ordinary life I had walked through like a man in a mask. And I made a decision, not a dramatic one, nothing with fire in it. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed. I waited for her to come out of the bathroom. She came out in her robe, surprised to see me sitting there like that. She said, "What's wrong?" Because she could read me. That was still true even then. After everything, she could read me. And I said, "I know about Raymond." And I did not say anything else. I just let those 5 words sit in the air between us. I have never in my life seen a person's face do what hers did in that moment. Not fall apart, not go angry, not do any of the dramatic things you might expect. It just went very still and very open, and something moved through her eyes that I have spent the rest of my life trying to interpret. It looked like grief, not guilt, grief. Like something she had been dreading for a long time had finally come through the door. She sat down. She said, "How long?" I said, "Since January." She put her hands over her face. We sat there for a long time, both of us in that bedroom, both of us not moving. Outside, the November wind was doing something to the big oak in the backyard. I could hear it through the window. That tree has been in that yard for 40 years, and I still hear it sometimes at night when I can't sleep, and I think about that evening. The sound of that tree in the wind, while everything that had been true about my life was quietly being rearranged. She asked me what I wanted to do, and that was the question. That was the real question. And here is what I said, and here is what I have to live with. I said, "I don't know yet." I said it quietly, without anger, without cruelty. I said it the way you say something when you genuinely don't know, and the not knowing feels like the most honest thing you have, because I did not know. I had spent a year knowing everything, except that. We did not divorce for another 14 months. 14 months. 14 months of living in that house, together with the thing out in the open between us. Not screaming about it, not crying about it every day, just existing with it, carefully, the way you move around something broken on the floor that you haven't decided whether to throw away or try to fix. We went to a counselor for a while, a woman over on Whitmore Street who had a plant in her window that was always dying a little. We went for about 4 months. We talked, or tried to, or did the version of talking that is not really talking but is more like arranging words into shapes that look like honesty without having to go all the way down to the bottom of things. It didn't save anything. I'm not sure anything could have, but I want to be honest and say that in those 14 months, there were moments. There were moments when I thought it was possible, when I looked at Diane and saw the woman I had married, the woman I had walked toward at the end of an aisle when we were both 26 years old and beautiful in the way young people are beautiful without knowing it, when I thought that what we had was still somewhere inside the damage, that if we were careful and patient, we might find it. I thought that more than once, and then I would be lying in the dark next to her, and I would think about the messages, not all of them, 1 or 2 specific ones, and the hope would go out like a candle in a closed room, not dramatically, just gone. Raymond. I have not spoken to Raymond Lewis since the March of the following year, going on 40 years now, 40 years of not speaking to a man I knew for 32 years, a man who was at my wedding, a man who held my son when he was 3 days old and said, "He's got your ears, Ezra, God help him," a man who sat with me in a hospital waiting room in 1988 when my father was having surgery, who did not talk, who did not try to make it better, who just sat there in that plastic chair next to me all night until the doctor came out. That man. I lost that man. I am an old man sitting in a chair in the middle of the night, and I am telling you that losing Raymond hurt me in ways that losing Diane did not. And that is an ugly thing to say. I know that. I have turned that over in my mind for years. What does it mean that the friendship hurt more? What does that say about the marriage? What does it say about me? Maybe it says that some wounds find the thing you protected most carefully and go for that first. Maybe it says that I had loved Raymond the way you love someone when you are young and have not yet learned to be careful with your love when you give it freely, because you do not yet know that it can be used against you. Diane and I had fought. Over the years we had argued and gone cold on each other and come back and argued again. There had been distance. There had been times when we were not kind to each other. The marriage had been real, which means it had been difficult. But Raymond had only ever been the good part. The cookouts and the card tables and the drives and the standing on the side of a basketball court when we were 19 with everything ahead of us. That was the part that got taken. That was the part I never replaced. I remarried eventually. A woman named Gloria, who was a retired teacher from over in Dunbar County and who was kind in a way that asked nothing of you, which was what I needed by then. what I could manage by then. We had 11 good years before her heart gave out. 11 quiet years. She knew about Diane and Raymond in the broad strokes, and she never pressed me on the details, and I was grateful for that. Grateful in a way that I think she deserved more than gratitude for. And I'm sorry about that now. She deserved a man who could open up the way she could. She was an open woman. She talked about everything, her past, her fears, her late husband, her regrets. She talked about all of it the way water runs. And I sat next to that and gave her what I could, which was presence and consistency and a certain kind of steadiness, but not openness. Never the full openness. I think she knew. I think she knew she was living alongside something in me that she was never going to reach, and I think she decided to love what she could reach and not mourn the rest. That was a generous choice. I did not deserve that choice. There is a thing I did that I have never told anyone. Not my children. Not Gloria. Not the counsellor on Whitmore Street. No one. In the months after I found out, in that period when I was being deliberate in the way I described, when I was cold and quiet and measured and moving the pieces around, I went to see Raymond, not to confront him. Not then. I went to see him because it was a Saturday, and that was what we did on Saturdays, and I needed to know if I could do it. If I could sit in his den and drink his coffee and watch a game and look at him without giving anything away. I needed to know the size of what I was carrying. We sat there for 4 hours. 4 hours of television and talking, and his wife Carol coming in with sandwiches at some point, and Raymond laughing and me laughing, and the game going the way games go, back and forth. And at one point Raymond put his hand on my shoulder the way he had done 1,000 times, just briefly, just in the middle of something funny he was saying, and I felt it. I felt it, and I said nothing, and I did not move, and I finished my coffee, and I drove home, and I sat in my driveway for a while, and I thought, I can do this. And that thought, the fact that I could think that thought and mean it, that is the thing I have never told anyone. Because what kind of man thinks that? What kind of man sits with his betrayer for 4 hours and thinks, I can do this, and means it not as a victory, but as a strategy? What does that mean about who I was, about who I had become by January of that year? I think about my father sometimes when I think about this. My father was a man named James Harold Green, who worked for the railroad for 36 years and never talked about his feelings once in all the time I knew him. He was not cruel. He was not absent. He was present in his chair every evening, and he worked hard, and he provided, and he loved us in the way he had been taught to love, which was through doing things, through showing up. He had a thing about him, though, a distance. Even when he was in the room, he was somewhere a few inches further away than other men. And I used to wonder about that distance. I used to wonder what was behind it. I know now. I know what that distance is. I know how it gets built. You carry things. You carry them alone because you were taught that carrying alone is what strength is. You carry them long enough that they become architecture. They become the walls of the room you live in. And by the time you understand what you've done, the walls are load-bearing. You can't take them down without the whole thing coming with them. My son, James, named for my father, he sat with me one time, about 10 years after the divorce, and he asked me directly. He said, "Pop, do you think what you did to Raymond was right?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I know what happened. Mum told us some of it. And I heard some things over the years about the contract, about what you did to the contract. I did not say anything. He said, I'm not judging you. I'm asking you." And I thought about it for a long time, long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. I said, "I think I became someone I didn't like to do something I couldn't stop myself from doing." He said, "That's not a yes or a no." I said, "No, it's not." He let it go. That's my son, James. He knows when to let things go. He got that from his mother. My daughter Angela took it harder. Not the Raymond thing. I don't think she fully understood the Raymond thing until she was older. She took the divorce hard. She was 23 and newly married herself when it happened, and she took it the way young people take their parents' divorces, as some kind of statement about the future she was building. Like the ground under her own life had shifted. I tried to explain to her that it was not about what was possible, that people could love each other well, that what happened to Diane and me was not a law that applied to everyone. But she looked at me with her mother's eyes while I said it, and I don't think she believed me. I don't know that I believed myself, but I think things turned out all right for Angela. I think she built something real. I watch her with her husband sometimes at the Sunday dinners they still have, and I think, there it is. There is what it can look like when two people are actually in it together. And I feel proud, and I feel something else under the pride that takes longer to name. I don't know what Raymond's life became. I know the broad outline. I know he and Carol stayed together, which surprised me. I know the business recovered eventually. Not what it was, but something. I know he moved out of the county about 12 years after everything. I heard he had grandchildren. I heard he had a health scare. I have not sought out any of this information. It just finds you when you live in the same county long enough. People tell you things. People forget that they are telling you about someone whose name you haven't spoken in decades. I wonder sometimes if he knows. About the contract, I mean. About Harold Sykes and the conversation I had. Whether he ever figured out that it was me. Whether he knows that the thing that cost him the school district was not bad luck or paperwork or a fairer bidder, but a man he had known for 32 years, making a phone call on a Wednesday morning in February. I don't know. I have never asked. I have imagined the conversation once or twice, not a shouting one. I'm not a shouting man. I imagine it quiet. Both of us old. Both of us past the part where anything needs to be proven. Just sitting somewhere, the way we used to sit, and getting there. Eventually, the way you get there, when you have known someone long enough to skip the preamble. But I don't think that conversation will ever happen. Some things calcify. Some things turn from something living to something else, something harder, something with weight, but no warmth. And then the years build up on top of it, and you forget that it was ever anything you could have reached. Diane is still alive. She lives in Florida now, near our daughter. She remarried a good while back, a man named Bernard, who is quiet and steady in the way that, if I am honest, probably suits her better than I did. I see her at the grandchildren's things, graduations and birthdays, and the occasional Sunday. We are cordial. That is the right word. Cordial in the way of people who shared something large and survived the ending of it, and are now old enough to know that the anger was never worth the price. She looks well. I am glad she looks well. I mean that genuinely. And the fact that I can mean it genuinely is something I hold on to. It tells me something about who I still am. Underneath the year of deliberateness and the cold phone calls and the walls I built, underneath all of that, there is still the man who married her at 26 and meant it. That man did not disappear. He got buried for a while under the weight of what happened, but he did not disappear. I think about the phone a lot, more than you'd think, more than 40-something years should still allow. There are nights when I wake up and the first thing in my mind is that kitchen counter, the phone lying there at an angle, the particular grey of that January morning before the sun came up. I lie in the dark and I replay it the way you replay something that changed everything, looking for the moment before, the last moment when the world was still the shape it had been, when I was still the man who trusted everyone in his life. It lasted about 4 seconds, from picking up the phone to understanding what I was reading. 4 seconds, maybe 5. And then everything after that was after. Isn't that something? Whole life divided by 4 seconds. I have a granddaughter named Simone, who is 12 years old, and who reminds me of nobody I have ever known, which is its own wonderful thing. She is completely herself. I watch her sometimes, and I think that is what it looks like when a person has not yet been taught to hold things in. When the feeling is still right there on the surface, still immediate, still honest. She gets angry, and she says so. She gets sad, and she shows it. She's 12 years old and already wiser than I was at 50 about what to do with the things that happen to you. I hope the world does not teach her to be like me. I hope it teaches her to be like herself. There is a photograph I keep in a drawer. I don't keep it out because I don't need to see it every day, but I don't throw it away either. It was taken at a cookout. Must have been 1983 or 84. Diane and I with Raymond and Carol and a few other couples, all of us in the backyard of somebody's house, summertime, everyone laughing. I am standing next to Raymond with my arm around his shoulder. We are both young. We are both holding drinks. We are both looking at whatever was making everyone laugh. Looking at that photograph, you would not know. You would see two men who trusted each other. And you would be right at that particular moment, on that particular afternoon. You would be entirely right. We were those men. Whatever we became later, whatever happened between then and January, in a cold kitchen with a phone on a counter, we were those men in that photograph. I keep it in the drawer because I can't throw it away, and I can't look at it too long. That is the truth of it. I have talked tonight about what I did, and I want to be clear about what I do not know. I do not know if it was right. I have told you, I am not proud of all of it, and that is true. The part with Cheryl, the part with Harold Sykes, those were things done in the dark, quiet, in a way that had nothing noble in it, done by a man who had been hurt and was not going to say so, who was not going to stand in a room and say, I am hurt, because that was not the language he had been given. So he found another language, a quieter one, a language that moved like groundwater, invisible, under everything. I hurt Raymond. I did that deliberately, and I knew what I was doing. I also know that he sat at my daughter's birthday table and cut a piece of cake for my granddaughter and looked me in the eye. I know both of those things. I hold both of those things. They do not resolve into one thing. I have waited a long time for them to resolve into one thing. I have waited for some understanding that would tie it all together, that would tell me which man I was, the wronged one, or the one who went too far. But the understanding has never come, and I'm old enough now to think that maybe it is not coming. Maybe both of those men are just me all the way down. Maybe that is the whole answer. I hear the wind tonight, same wind as always, coming through the same oak in the same backyard, the one that was there the night I told Diane. That tree is older than me now. It was there when I moved in, and it will be there when I'm gone, and I find some comfort in that. The continuity of things that don't involve me. The fact that the world keeps its own time, regardless of what any one man does in a kitchen on a January morning before sunrise. My children are good people. I want to say that because it matters to me. Through the divorce and everything after, through whatever damage got done, they became good people. James is steady and fair and present for his children in ways I was not always present for him. Angela is fierce and loving and knows how to fight for the things she cares about in a way I could never quite manage. I can take a little credit for that. Not much, maybe, but a little. And there are the grandchildren. The grandchildren are something else entirely. They come over on Sundays sometimes, and the house fills up in a way it hasn't filled up in a long time, and I watch them, and I think, there it is. There is the part that outlasts everything, the part that had nothing to do with me and Diane, or me and Raymond, or any of the things that took up so much space for so many years, the part that just goes forward. I am tired tonight. That is not a complaint, it is just true. There is a tiredness that comes at this hour that is not unpleasant, a settling, the body saying, enough for today, and meaning it kindly. I have been sitting in this chair for a long time, and the house is quiet, and the wind is in the oak, and somewhere out there is a world that will still be turning tomorrow morning, whether I am in it or not. I think about Raymond still. I think about the way he would laugh. He had this laugh that started somewhere deep and came up slow, like he was surprised by it every time, like the funny thing kept being funny as it rose. I have not heard that laugh in 40 years, and I can still hear it exactly the sound of it. That is what time does not take. It takes so many things. It takes the sharp edges off the anger and the heat off the hurt, and it blurs the details of the specific arguments and the specific nights. But it does not take the sound of a laugh. It does not take the way a person's face looked in a particular light on a particular afternoon in 1983, when everyone was young and laughing at something and nobody knew yet what was coming. It keeps that, holds it, the way I was told a strong man holds things. Maybe that is not so wrong after all. Maybe keeping the laugh is the point. Maybe all the carrying and the holding is not just about the heavy things. Maybe it is also about holding the thing in the photograph. The two men in the summer light with their arms around each other, both of them trusting, both of them young, both of them entirely unaware of the January kitchen that is coming for them. Maybe carrying that is worth something. I don't know. I am very tired now, and I don't know. I have said the things I needed to say, and some I didn't plan to, and left out others that are still not ready, that maybe will never be ready. That will go with me when I go. That is all right. A man does not have to empty himself completely. Some things are between him and whatever is waiting on the other side of all this quiet, the wind, the oak, the dark that is just the dark, ordinary and patient, the same dark it has always been, asking nothing, giving nothing, just there. I am just here, still here, for now.